Hi there, I'm Robbie Boyd, a third-year psychological and behavioural sciences student at Queen's College. I am a singer in the Pembroke Chapel Choir, which is where we're sat today, and I am joined by a woman who needs no introduction, Anna Lapwood, who is the director of the Pembroke Chapel Choir. Today we're going to be talking about forging a career in music and the state of music post-pandemic. You have an option to ask some questions, which will be sent through here, and we'll do a little Q&A at the end for the last 10 minutes. So we'll answer those questions then. But for now, we'll jump right in, and I'll start with an easy question. What has being the director of music at Pembroke been like through the pandemic?
You say an easy question. It's been quite difficult. I think we've all found the same thing. All directors of music have found it quite hard, chiefly because there's just been no ability to plan. So we've been having to do a lot of risk assessments, and you do a risk assessment and then the next day find that the government guidance has changed or something, and you have to redo that process over and over again. I think also we found that the kind of extra musical side of things has drastically increased. So there's been an increased sense of pastoral responsibility, realizing that for so many singers and musicians and students, being in a choir is not about singing at all, it's about having a support network. And for the last 2 years, more than ever before, they've really needed that.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something I found being a member in the choir. You know, I would find that space, that hour each week would really calm me down, bring me back to some kind of routine when actually everything else in the world is going a bit crazy or everything else is online. You know, being able to sing in a choir is really grounding through the pandemic.
Completely, and I think also because of the fact that so little has been possible in person from a university perspective, so most supervisions being online, things like that, choir has become one of the only points of kind of proper interaction, face-to-face interaction, and a really good way to keep an eye on people and make sure that everyone is staying sane in one way or another.
Absolutely. So obviously there was periods where we were allowed to meet as a choir. When we weren't, in the height of the pandemic, how was it being a conductor in something, you know, I imagine you've never done before, conducting over an online platform?
Well, you could probably answer that question from the other side. How was it being taught online? But it felt a little bit like being a CBBC presenter, in that you had to find a way to keep a room full of people engaged whilst not being able to hear them. So trying to rehearse a choir when you can't hear them is obviously quite a challenging thing. I think it essentially involved rethinking again what it means to be in a choir, and we tried to use the time to learn some new repertoire by kind of doing it so people could hear me playing parts on the piano, and then we'd try singing onto recordings and things like that. We also had quite a few visiting speakers come along, some incredible, in fact, alumni of the university come and share their thoughts on wider music making. So actually, the focus shifted away from the singing and onto kind of developing the choir as individual musicians and people, in the hope that when we could then meet together, the sense of community hadn't disappeared, because I think that's what the choir is, it's a community, and I was most worried that we're going to lose that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about community. Obviously, you've been part of the Pembroke community for 5 years now. What have been your thoughts? What have been your experiences since being here? Just to give people a bit of a backstory.
So I turned up very, very fresh-faced. I realise I'm still pretty fresh-faced, but I came straight out of university. So I'd finished a 3-year organ scholarship in Oxford, and I turned up and I learned on the job, essentially. I was very lucky that Pembroke took a quite large risk appointing someone fresh out of uni, and they were brilliant at supporting me and helping me learn in a kind of safe, sheltered environment, and let me make all my mistakes. And I have made a lot of mistakes and still make lots of mistakes, but they were very patient. And I think over the course of 5 years, again, it's all about this idea of what a choir is. That has changed a lot, and I've realised how important a choir can be for helping people's mental health. And I think when I turned up, I was sort of thinking, come on, let's get the notes right. We've got to sing for a service. Even song is the most important thing in the world. Whereas now I kind of see that as a byproduct and see the personal growth and development of each singer as the main part of what I do and the main part of my role. And I think alongside that, I've also seen the immense power that a choir can have for evoking social change. So we, as you know, have spent a lot of time working on music by female composers, by Bain composers, and I think seeing how that then has an impact on how the choir interact as a group of people is incredible. I mean, there is so much power held in the values that you kind of instill in the group of people, whether it's through singing or creative writing or drama, as you do. I think we can change quite a lot. Yeah,
and we'll touch on that a little bit more when we talk about where music's heading post-pandemic. So we'll talk about access and broadening horizons. So we've spoken a little bit about Pembroke. Let's think about more broadly, how has being a professional musician been affected by the pandemic?
This is a really difficult question in a way, because what does a professional musician look like? And it's very, very different for different people. So a lot of my self-employed colleagues have had a really rough 2 years. I mean, I have one of my closest friends who is a singer has had to retrain, I think, twice already, and just trying to do anything so that she has a solid income. She's moved out of her flat, all of this. It's been really hard financially, obviously, because the financial life of a musician is relatively precarious anyway, but it works if there's the constant stream of concerts that we just expect to be there the whole time. If those are cancelled for a sufficient period of time, then that disappears. So that's been really difficult. And I think also with, I don't want to go into it too much, but the sort of uncertainty surrounding Brexit, that's had an impact as well. So there's been kind of a double attack on self-employed musicians, making life very, very difficult for them. I am in the privileged position, obviously, of having a salaried job. So that has helped in that I haven't had the same, not quite the same financial concerns that a lot of my colleagues have had. But I think the kind of emotional toll of the last 2 years has still been immense, because as a musician, you're having to plan ahead and psychologically prepare yourself for these high pressure situations. And suddenly we've been in a world where you psychologically prepare yourself for something and then it moves. It suddenly is moved 2 weeks later, or cancelled, but it might be rescheduled. And so you're constantly in this state of kind of heightened preparation, ready to go on stage, but not quite sure if you're going to or not. So yeah, it's been difficult. The flip side of that is I always try and find positives where I can. So the flip side is that we've all had more time and more space, and it's made me realize the importance of taking time and space, because as musicians, I guess it's the same as students, our lives are about bouncing from gig to gig and never really stopping, and actually having the time to stop and think deeply about music has been kind of one of the great joys of the last 2 years, having the time to really focus and practice and do 8 hours practice a day again, which I haven't been able to do since I was 18. It's been nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's nice that there's been some positives.
Yeah.
Have you had any kind of concerts or things going on recently in the pandemic that were a particular highlight?
I recorded an organ CD, which I think really wouldn't have happened were it not for the pandemic, because I had that extra time to practice. I basically fell in love with the instrument again. I worked on a new transcription of Britten's 4 C interludes rewritten for the organ. And that was very much a lockdown project, and decided, right, I really want to record this and make this into a CD. So that was a plus that wouldn't have happened. I played at the Proms for the first time. Again, I think realistically, if I hadn't had the time and space that the pandemic did give me to practice, I wouldn't have been in a position where I would be ready to play at the Proms. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's been difficult, but there have been little bits of light that I've been able to take from it. And I'm just hoping that now, fingers crossed, we might be in a position where for everyone, the work is picking up again, the financial side of things is becoming more stable. For choirs, we can hopefully return to singing a little bit closer together, and with a slightly more normal schedule.
And so do you think there's anything that's going to have a lasting effect from that? So you talked a bit about financial precariousness and emotional toll. Do you think that's something that's going to kind of stop when the pandemic and lockdowns will stop, or do you think that there's going to be a continued effect?
I think we're going to be seeing the effect of this for quite a long time. I think particularly with young people, the emotional toll, I think, is going to be coming out for several years. I mean, undergraduates, but also looking at school-age children.
Yeah.
They're kind of looking at the emotional impact for them of missing that much school and missing that much sort of socialization time. So I'm worried about that. And I think something we'll touch on later as well is attention span. I've certainly seen in my girls' choir that the increased screen time that they've all had in the last couple of years, which has been completely necessary, the increased screen time has meant that their ability to focus has drastically diminished. One of them said to me, "Oh, I can't watch film anymore. I don't have the attention span to watch a film, so I don't watch films. I just watch TV episodes," which I think is absolutely terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that actually music is one of the few things that can reverse that process, because you have to focus on one thing. In terms of the financial impact and sort of looking at the music industry as opposed to looking at young people, I wonder if we're going to see a lot more people following portfolio careers as opposed to putting all of their eggs in one basket, because I think we've all been scared by the precariousness of the last couple of years and the idea that, well, what if it happened again? Trying to safeguard yourself against that. Musicians already had portfolio careers, but I think we're going to see even more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people wondering, how did you personally forge such a successful career? So we'll kind of move away from the pandemic, because I know your career started long before that, and just talk a little bit about like how you got to where you are today.
So when I was younger, when I was very young, I basically just loved taking up as many instruments as possible and kind of translating skills from one instrument to another. So I would play the piano and then think, oh, I wonder how that would sound on the violin. So ended up taking up all these instruments and never really settled down. I always liked breadth as opposed to kind of focusing on one specific thing. And I was always told that that was a bad thing. I remember from the age of about 8 or 9, people would say, no, if you want to be a serious musician, you need to focus on one instrument. And I said, but I like them all. So I sort of settled on the harp when I was about 15. I think I was studying at the Junior Royal Academy, and I decided, right, this is what I want to do. I want to be an orchestral harpist. And then the organ came along maybe a year later. And I thought, oh, this is quite fun. It could be an interesting other thing to explore. But I think I never thought it was going to be something serious. Mm-hmm. And then it came to the point of applying for university. And I was very torn between Oxbridge and looking at an organ scholarship, or going to conservatoire as a harpist and pursuing that as my kind of proper career and going on to be an orchestral harpist. And I ended up getting the organ scholarship to Pembroke College in Oxford, which is one of the heftier scholarships, shall we say. You play for 8 services a week. So you're playing 3 services on Sunday and then a service every other day with 1 day off. You rehearse the boy choristers every morning at 7:50. So you're sort of doing a full-time job alongside a degree. Mm-hmm. So that sort of made my decision for me, in that I turned up and I didn't really play the harp for 3 years. I did a little bit, but not much. And instead was playing the organ for 8 hours a day and completely immersing myself in the choral world, which I'd never experienced before. So a lot of people who are organ scholars might go through a choristership, and so they grow up singing all of that music. I hadn't had that. So it felt a little bit like, the way I often describe it is, it felt like doing a degree or an organ scholarship in a second language, because I was having to learn all this new terminology for the first time. I remember the director of music saying, "Oh, Anna, can you go and get the psalters?" And I was like, what the hell is a psalter?
I don't even know what a psalter is.
And I was there in the song school looking around, looking for something related to salt, obviously, as opposed to the Psalms. And I was terrified I was going to get shouted at. And so all this stuff that I had to learn for the first time. But I was very lucky that the director of music was very nurturing and encouraging, and kind of helped teach me all of this stuff, was very patient with me, making stupid mistakes like that, and came out of the other end of it thinking, this is what I want to do. I want to be a choral musician. And then I was very lucky again that Pembroke came up just as I was applying for jobs. I'd been applying for various things, hadn't been getting anything, was thinking, oh gosh, that's it. I'm out in the real world and nothing. And then Pembroke came along and I applied thinking I wouldn't get it, but they took a risk on me and I've been here ever since, basically.
Amazing. So we've spoken about, you went through kind of through an Oxbridge college and then have ended up at an Oxbridge college, what would you say to people who are looking to get into classical music who wouldn't necessarily come to Oxbridge? You know, would maybe be at a different university, maybe don't go to university at all? Where would be the access opportunities for choral or classical music?
There are amazing choirs, cathedral choir. If we're thinking about choral music, maybe have a separate conversation about classical music more broadly in a second, but thinking about choral music, there are incredible choirs in every city because we've got cathedrals everywhere. Yeah. So I would say go along to your local cathedral and go and chat to the director of music, because they are always happy to talk to people and hear people sing. If you are a keen pianist thinking perhaps the organ might be something you would like to try, go and tell them, because we are desperately trying to encourage more people to play the organ. I think it's about being proactive and starting those conversations. But I also think that we, in these privileged positions of working and singing and making music in an Oxbridge college, have a responsibility to be proactive in the other direction and show people who aren't at Oxbridge what a wonderful world it can be, the world of choral music, not necessarily with a goal of getting them to come to Oxbridge, but with a goal of just showing them that that can be a great enhancement to life to get involved with a choir.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thinking on other ways of access, you know, you are quite famous, we might say, for being a woman in music and for being, you know, one of the only female directors of music. I think I'm right in saying you were the first female organ scholar.
Yeah.
Is that true? Yeah. So, you know, what would you say that being a woman has brought to your career or maybe detracted from?
I think we were having this conversation yesterday. It is a bit of a double-edged sword, and so often people say to me, "Oh, but you've sort of made your career from being a woman. Isn't it a good thing?" Yes, I have no doubt that I have got a lot of opportunities because I am female and memorable as a sort of one of the few female directors of music in Oxbridge. You stick in people's memory. That's a good thing. I think my hope is that as it becomes more normal to see women in these positions, people are less surprised by it. I mean, people still assume that I'm an undergraduate. People still ask me if I'm the organ scholar, all of this, and I've been here 5 years. And everyone always says, "Oh no, in 10 years' time, you're going to be very grateful that people think you're young." But actually, when you've worked really hard to create a choir and a welcoming space and all this, and you've kind of trying to put your mark on something, it's really frustrating when everyone just assumes you are less than you are, if that makes sense. And sort of sexist comments and inverted commas, which just will always have always been there, and at the moment I think will always be there. I just hope we reach a point where they disappear entirely, and it's not something that the next generation of directors of music have to think about. I'm lucky that my colleagues are brilliant here, and it's never from them, it's concertos and things like that. That's frustrating. But as I said, being a woman has sort of put me where I am.
Yeah, and something that maybe comes with that is that you approach your job slightly differently. I know you've been using social media a lot. How would you say the social media has influenced music, particularly in the pandemic, actually, given we can't all be together?
Well, I think that's one thing in you sort of saying, how do we encourage more, say, women in music? I think it's all about visibility. I mean, why would you, as a kid, why would you think you could do a job if you couldn't see someone who looks like you doing that job? This is a conversation we all have the whole time. So a lot of what I've been doing over the past, 5 years, I guess, is trying to be as open and honest as possible about what it is like to be a woman in music, but an organist, a conductor, and just kind of give a bit of a behind the scenes look at what it is actually like day to day. I think also, when it comes to increasing representation, it goes back to this idea of reaching people where they already are instead of expecting them to come to us. So, for example, why would someone who isn't religious, why would they go into a church? Why would they hear an organ? Why would they know that that was even a possibility for them? What if we, as organists, make sure that they might stumble across our music on TikTok or Twitter or Facebook, where we know that young people are spending hours and hours and hours every day. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is separate, but we know that they're there. So I think we have a responsibility to take our music to them and hope that we can, I don't know, make one more person discover that they like organ music.
Yeah.
It seems like a no-brainer to me. I know it's not always a popular opinion, but I think personally, I have seen the positive impact that it can have.
And choirs quite often come under fire for being predominantly white, quite middle class, because those are the people who've had the access to the cathedral choirs or the big schools. Do you think social media could maybe help invert that? Is there anything else you're doing to kind of move away from that?
Yeah, I mean, we've, again, as you know, in Pembroke Choir, we've been talking a lot about this over the past couple of years, and trying to do more music by composers who are ethnic minorities is part of our sort of Pembroke Choir scheme at the moment. I think to talk about that very briefly before coming on to sort of the big question, a lot of people say, isn't it just box ticking? If you say, as we did, that you're going to include one piece by a female composer and one piece by an ethnic minority composer, isn't that just trivial? Isn't that just box ticking? Isn't that even worse? Well, no, because it means that you're building up knowledge of this music, and it means that our choir library has gone like this, and our choir library as a whole is now much more kind of equal and diverse, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then we are now in a position where people assume that what we do is by women. I mean, you did this, I remember a couple of years ago, you said, oh, I love what this composer's done here. She's really brought out this, and it was a male composer.
Yeah.
People assume now that it's by a woman, as opposed to the other way around. Normally, people would always assume something's by a man. So I think that's the first thing I would say, is that sometimes you have to go too far in order to then come back and be able to have a nuanced approach. But thinking about how we can improve the diversity of the choirs, I think having a more diverse repertoire hopefully will help. And again, what we were talking about earlier, that seems to change the approach of the people in the choir to be slightly more inclusive and open-minded and prompt the right sort of conversations. But then I think we need to be doing more to be proactive and go into schools and communities who might not know about the choral world, and show them what it's like, and show them that you don't have to be a certain kind of person, or you don't have to fit a stereotype or anything. It is open to everyone, and it's beautiful, and it's special. Yeah, and we just want as many people as possible to be involved with that. Absolutely.
Well, the last question on diversity that I'll pose is that you know, this has been a big thing in theatre, and I think in singing as well, is as kind of trans issues and gender issues come to the forefront, you know, do we need to be careful about voice parts? Because obviously you're born into a sex that has a certain voice part, but then if you have a different gender, you know, we can't still be saying things like, oh, lads, to talk about our basses and tenors. So how do we kind of move forward with that?
Yeah, I think this is something that is, I'm sort of now thinking about more, and we've got a couple of trans people in our choir at Pembroke. And again, I'm very lucky that those people are very open and happy to sit down with me and say, this is what you can do to help. This is what is a bit unhelpful. And also very kind of, I mean, I keep making mistakes with that, because it's habit. You get used to saying, right, gents, when you're talking about the back row, or ladies talking about the front row. And actually, the front row hate being referred to as ladies. So why? It's not necessary. Yeah. It's just getting rid of that ingrained vocabulary. And I think having the conversations with the people who it actually affects is the most important thing, and saying to them, please tell me what is best for you and how I can best support you in this process. And listening. Basically, that's at the heart of it. But it would be really interesting to see how it impacts, I mean, sort of the boy-girl choir question. Yeah. Because I think that is going to become, if we are seeing more trans people coming through at younger ages, then that is going to become relevant, isn't it?
Yeah, we can't have those classic boundaries of gender that we had before. And I think that's being broken down anyway. As you were telling me, there's now more young girls in the choirs, being choristers. It's not just young boys.
Yeah.
So, you know.
But I think it's going to be an interesting time, and I'll be intrigued to see how it sort of comes out in choral music.
Mm-hmm. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of post-pandemic, or how the pandemic has affected music making. Do you feel like there's been a change in the quality of music or the quality of the choir during the pandemic, and how do you think that will change going forward?
Yes, be slightly careful. Yeah, I think we've all found that we've had to play catch up a little bit, because we've missed, I mean, Pembroke Choir, for example, only had basically 2 weeks of singing together as a whole choir in a whole year. So obviously it's not in the position that I would have hoped it would be in. Yeah, but we have to be patient with ourselves and with everyone in the situation, and sort of say that's to be expected. The flip side of it is, this is something we've talked about quite a lot, I think the individuals in Pembroke Choir, the individuals have improved, because in place of the full choir work, we've been doing a lot of small consort work and solo services. I mean, the two of us have worked quite closely together on sort of bits of sight reading and things like that. There's been the time and capacity for me as a director of music to focus on the individuals much more and build them up. And so I'm quite excited actually about this year, when now we're hopefully back to singing with a full choir. I'm hopeful that we're going to see those built up individuals merging as a whole and creating a much better musical result. I think that could be quite exciting. Then obviously, again, it's different for every individual choir or orchestra group, depending on what they've been able to do. So I really do feel for a lot of amateur choirs who have been stuck on Zoom even longer than we have. And I think in terms of vocal stamina, that is going to be a challenge when they're back in the room again together. If you get used to filling your bedroom with sound and then suddenly you have to fill a chapel with sound, it's a very different thing from a technical perspective. So I think we're not out the woods, and I think it's going to be a sort of slow journey to recovery. But again, it's a slightly more nuanced thing than just saying it's been terrible musically. Yeah,
that's very true. And I know I benefited from having that more one-to-one support that you can't have in a normal year, because there's just not the time, everyone's working, you've got all these in-person things. So it's definitely, there have been positives with us being able to do sing lessons. I know you've done that for a few other choir members. So yeah, there's definitely, I feel like I've improved more than I would have done if just kind of able to blend back with the choir and not really get hurt. Suddenly, when it's a smaller choir, you're standing 2 meters apart. It's quite obvious if you don't understand or if you're not keeping up.
Yeah.
So I think that really brought something to the table. It was scary, but it also means everyone's expected to keep up with the standard. And so you've got to do that bit extra work that you didn't necessarily have to do before.
Well, it's like with orchestras, talking to any orchestral conductor, they say that at the beginning, yes, 2 meters was a really scary experience for everyone involved. But actually, for example, with the string section, every string player had to play like a soloist. And so the kind of, everyone sort of suddenly stands up like this and went, oh gosh, okay, right, I can't run on my desk partner quite the same way. And so the end result was actually much more exciting in some ways, and the kind of potential from the expanded music making was there in a way it hadn't been before. So yeah, positives and negatives. I think that's the big takeaway from all this.
Absolutely. And do you think there's a space for online music making and online kind of concerts in the future when we don't have to do it, but do you think it would still be a useful thing?
I hope so. I have a slightly love-hate relationship with online concerts. As a soloist, I used to really hate doing anything online, because I hated the idea that it was just there forever. You want to be spontaneous and open and kind of share a lot as a musician. And the idea that then that event, which is a sort of fleeting thing, is suddenly fixed in time and there forever. That was something I really struggled with at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think all of our attitudes have had to change a little bit and move from thinking of it as this fixed thing to seeing it as a snapshot of your musical thoughts at that particular point in time, and be slightly less perfectionist. about the whole thing. And yeah, we've all seen how actually having concerts online, we can reach far more people. We can reach people with accessibility issues, things like that. They can suddenly come along to a concert. I mean, look at this festival. People who live in the States can be in Pembroke Chapel with us and join us. It's great. So yeah, I hope it carries on.
And you do the Barkathon as well, don't you? Which is an online, bringing everyone together. So I guess, was that something you did before the pandemic?
We did. The Barkathon started its life entirely in person, in Pembroke Chapel, on that organ. And the poor organ, 24 hours of being played. By the end of it, it was very out of tune. With the pandemic, we changed it so people submitted videos from all over the world. And it made us rethink the event and actually created a much better event, because suddenly we had 80 organists on 80 organs, and it was so much more interesting than it had been before. So yes, we've had to change a lot and we've had to tweak how we do things, but I'm hoping that we're all going to rebuild better, and having learned from the experiences of the past 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, I was just going to ask about funding. I know that the music industry has taken a big hit on financially. Do you think we're going to see, concerts spring right back up this year, or do you think it's going to be a bit of a slow burner before we get back up to kind of cultural events that we had before?
It's difficult because concert halls still aren't all at full capacity, and there's also the question of how safe people feel being in a full concert hall. Everyone has to do their own individual risk assessment. So at the Proms, it was amazing to have basically a full hall for the Saint-Saëns. Then doing it the next week in Birmingham, we had kind of 50% capacity, and I think that was partly down to people just not quite knowing if they felt comfortable being in a full space again. And so obviously that raises the question of financial viability. Do you increase the ticket prices to cover the 50% you aren't going to be there? That is a bad move in my view. Do you just accept that we'll be operating at a loss for the foreseeable future? How does that factor into the online side of things? Do we provide the online stream for free so that it's accessible to everyone? Does the artist get an extra fee for it being streamed? Before the pandemic, an artist would always get more if it was filmed, but now it's just assumed that it's kind of rolled into the deal. There are a lot of questions. There are many answers, sadly. I hope it will become clearer. But I think the big takeaway for me is that people love and need live music, and you can't replicate that online. You can't replicate the experience of having 4,000 people in a room completely silent and waiting for music to happen. That is the most incredible feeling in the world, and something that we've all missed so much, and something that I think we're all craving and excited to have.
Absolutely. And I think that was very true of theatre as well. I was doing live stream theatre, and it's just not the same. So I do comedy, and to not have an audience laughing, you need that instant laughter. Otherwise it's just like, who am I performing this to?
Yeah.
And yes, we kind of problem solved and did online stuff. We did filming, and it definitely brought new skills. But yeah, I think there's something special about having an audience in the room, being able to share that, with the people around you. It's definitely really important.
Do you think you're going to see a return to theatre sort of back to normal straight away? Or do you think
I've been really surprised by how quickly, I think also bearing in mind here, students are young, they're maybe less scared, they're maybe, more willing to go to the theatres. So I think it's been fine. We're already kind of selling full house. We're not worried about not selling out. I can imagine maybe with classical music, if we've got a slightly older audience, there's maybe more fear about, getting COVID. So maybe it will be a slightly slower return for classical music than it would be for something like comedy or, pop music. I don't know. So maybe that's a big difference.
Well, we can keep our fingers crossed.
Yes, absolutely. So we spoke a little bit about attention span.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk about your young girls choir and where you see, any differences in them, any differences in children and music. Because, if we're talking about the future of music, they are the future. So
Yeah.
what do you think is going to be different about their generation?
I mean, I will just reiterate what I said earlier about the attention span thing. That is something that makes me really worried and nervous. And I'm sure, I mean, I don't know if you found this, but when I was spending more time on my phone over lockdown, I noticed it as well. I noticed that my ability to focus on one task vanished.
Yeah.
And I actually had to set time limits for myself because we were in this weird flux world where everything was different. I set time limits on my phone and managed to reverse the process, but that took quite a lot of willpower. And look at young kids. How do we expect them to have the willpower to go through that reversal process? Music is the way that they can do it without realizing they're doing it, because they can't have their phone on them while they're singing in choir. They have to focus for an hour and a half on one activity and not think about anything else. As you know, it's really hard to sing and sight read if you're thinking about something else. So they're just forced to be present and in the moment. And I just hope that the government and everyone else realizes that now is the time to push music. And that's the way we're going to get everyone back on track, because otherwise I am really nervous about what the next generation is going to look like in 5 years' time. We're going to have a whole group, this is very pessimistic, but a group of people who've missed out on important socialization and who have no attention span.
Right. And that's actually a reason that, you know, classically in state schools, they have been focusing on, you know, we've got to push for science, maths, English funding. And I know my school massively cut on music and drama budget. But if those are the things that actually help you focus and would drift into your maths or English or science, if that's what the government thinks is more important, there is still utility in funding the arts because it's allowing you to focus kind of holistically. Well,
also, if we talk about the lost time in terms of socialization and the sort of emotional impact of that, we need to be teaching them to think about emotions and talk about emotions. And again, the arts is kind of the easy way, not the easy way, but it's the quickest way into it. And I realise I'm probably preaching to the converted with the group of people who are at this talk, but I just really hope that the right decisions are made and that the sort of importance of the arts isn't overlooked in terms of healing that generation of people who've had such a difficult time at the end of their school careers or at the beginning of their school careers.
Absolutely. Well, we'll get to the questions from the audience in a minute. The last question I'll ask you is, you know, you've been here for 5 years now. What are your plans for the next 5 years with Pembroke? Like, where are you looking to go with it?
Everyone always asks me this. They're like, well, you've done 5 years, so what's next? Keep doing it and do it better. I think, I feel as if 5 years, over the last 5 years at Pembroke, I've been sort of trying to figure out who we are and what we stand for and what our structure looks like. And obviously setting up the girls' choir, increasing the schedule of the chapel choir, those have all been kind of big parts of the last 5 years for me. Now it's about really bedding that in. It's almost like the hard work starts now because we've got our schedule, we've done all our shiny new things. It's about making that as good as possible and trying to keep banging that drum about equality in choral music in terms of repertoire and in terms of the people we've got in the choir, and I guess lead by example and show what a beautiful thing it can be if you're sensitive to the changing world around you.
Amazing.
Gosh, that sounded profound, didn't it?
Okay, so we have some questions from the audience. So last year you were presented with a Woman of the Year award. What was it like to be presented with it?
It was a bit of a surprise. I was also over Zoom. I think I was in my pajamas at the time because it was at the height of lockdown. It was a really nice surprise actually, and I think particularly given how difficult that year was, having that little bit of kind of recognition, it really did mean a huge amount. And yeah, it was surreal, not what I was expecting at all. And I hope that what I'm doing can help inspire more young women to kind of follow a similar path. And so I guess that was some kind of recognition of that.
Oh, that's amazing. And kind of on a similar vein, Lizzie here says, who was a woman that inspired you in music?
Ooh, my first ever piano teacher was this amazing lady called Christine Wilde. She was an elderly lady in our village, and it was all about the joy of making music as opposed to the kind of the technical side of things. And I remember she had this little piano in her house, and you know, those early childhood memories, which is so vivid. So she had this little garden, and there were tiny strawberries that we used to pick on the way to the piano lesson. But in the lessons themselves, it would all be about the joy of making music and the joy you can bring to other people. And I think even at the age of 6 or 7, that went in somehow. I think the other people who really inspired me at a young age were my senior piano teacher, Maureen Rosenberg, again, an amazing lady. And she was the first person to be strict with me about music making, because I think joy can take you so far, but then you have to put the technical work in. I remember her turning around to me and saying, "That isn't ready, you're not playing it in the concert today." And I was absolutely devastated, and I cried and cried and cried and cried, but she was totally right. And again, when we talk about the power of music and its impact on young people, sometimes you need to be told that it's not ready. And we shy away from that a little bit now in education. I think we can be quite sort of softly, but having someone say to you, "No, you need to do more work," it was a good life lesson, and I'm still in touch with her now. She's amazing.
So James here says he's just left a conservatoire and was wondering how you would say it's easiest to make the leap from conservatoire into the professional world.
Oh gosh, well, because I didn't go to conservatoire, and this is in a way sort of one of the things that I struggle with a little bit. I sort of think, oh, well, how would life be different had I done conservatoire? But in terms of the leap from education to the professional world, work hard but you just need to be at the top of your game as much as possible, and be prepared to go out and do concert after concert after concert. Be aware that you are going to have concerts that aren't as good, and that's okay. That happens, and it's about learning how to deal with them, how to process them, and how to come back stronger. I had a thing in a concert relatively recently where I turned 2 pages at once in a piece of music, and then turned back 2 pages, trying to get back to the right place. And it was worst nightmare situation. And I just went, "I'm so sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have a problem with my page turns." I made a joke out of it, went back to the start of the piece, thought, "Come on, you've got to do this now," and played the whole thing through perfectly. And it was a horrible moment mentally. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine, it's kind of, please, ground, swallow me up right now. We all have them. And it's about learning how to come out of it and keep going and get through to the end. So be at the top of your game as much as possible, but be prepared to deal with not being at the top of your game. And social media, I would say, it is a good way to kind of make a statement about who you are and what you want to say.
We can't ignore, that it's a big part of life now. And, the choral industry isn't above social media. You know, there's no difference between choral music and other forms of the arts. You know, it can be a great way to kind of push yourself out there.
I think particularly if you're wanting to make a career as a soloist, look at a pop musician. It's all about personality, and what better way to convey your personality than through social media, if used correctly, and providing an honest, open look at what it is actually like to be you. Set yourself boundaries, though. Don't share too much. But I think it's a great way to put yourself out there.
So we've got a final question, and it is that somebody who is a Cambridge alumni is now going into teaching. What would be your best tips teaching a young group and also an older group of students?
Okay, so for young people, always be tuned in and know when to stop, because they will hit a moment when they have just absorbed as much as they can about a certain thing, and it will go backwards from that point. And so you need some kind of reset. So I have a bank of things that in my kind of inventory, when the girls can't reach that point in a piece and it's just getting worse, not better, and we'll switch it up, we'll do something completely different. I'll talk about nonsense for 30 seconds, tell a story and reset them, and then they can carry on again. I think it's so important to be responsive to the people in the room, not just follow your set plan of what that rehearsal or lesson is going to look like. with older people. I don't know if they mean older as in...
I think they mean like students my age.
Your age, okay. You're not better than them. I think that's everyone's an equal. And I think that's the big mistake I made when I first arrived at Pembroke, is I thought, I'm young, I need to make my mark, so I'm going to hold myself up here and the choir here. And I think the big thing I have changed now, 5 years later, is everything is a conversation. And I will listen, I will try and listen to every opinion. Even if I'm not sure I agree with it, I will listen to it and think, should I be changing what I'm doing to match that opinion? The answer isn't always yes, but I think it has to be a dialogue.
Yeah.
And particularly if you're closer in age with people, there's no point going in heavy-handed. It won't achieve the results you want. It will just make everyone's knuckles rise. Yeah. So I guess in a way it's saying the same for both of them. Listen and be ready for teaching to be a conversation as opposed to a dictatorship.
Yeah. Well, amazing. It's been so nice talking to you and hearing your thoughts on everything, hearing a bit of your backstory. I'm sure people might have a few more questions after this. You can probably contact Anna on social media, on her Instagram, Anna Lapwood Organ, if you did have any questions to follow up from this interview. But otherwise, thank you very much.
Thanks for talking to me, Robbie. It's been very fun.